Alright. I am totally not cool enough for this scene. This is crazy. See, I am from Oregon. I'm from Portland. And you all know about Portlandia, right? The only way to be transgressive in Portland anymore is to dress like you work at a Remax in Houston. So, that's what we're rocking tonight. The only problem is when you come to some place like San Francisco, everybody thinks you're from Houston. So, anyway, I'm going to read from The Hidden Goddess, which is the second book. There's the first book is called The Native Star. That was the one that was nominated for the Nebula. This one was nominated for nothing, so it's fine. You know what? Usually what I do, because it's the second book, is I write all these notes so that I can kind of say, you know, center you, ground you in the story so that you know what's going on. Fuck it. It's going to be a lot cooler if I confuse you. Alright, so I am reading a scene. Now, in both of these books, there's a lot of scenes set in San Francisco. So this is one of the ones that's set in San Francisco. The year is 1876, and someone who is like a historical expert in San Francisco history told me I got something wrong in this. So, you know, watch and learn. If you can figure it out, maybe you'll get a prize. All right. When Emily reached the depot, the summer sun had risen, washing the buildings of white limestone and red brick with the bright promise of a hot day to come. Emily tried to find a cab to take her to the butter yellow house, but there were none to be had. She sighed heavily, aware suddenly of just how bone-weary she was. She was sure to be a delight at Mother Stanton's lunch. She'd have to fight to keep from falling face down into the terrapin soup. Pounding down exhaustion, she started jogging along 3rd Street. At Market, she glanced up at the large clock atop the Chronicle building, 8:15 a.m. That meant it was already 11:15 in New York. It would be a tight squeeze, but by heck, she could still make it. 20 minutes up to the butter yellow house, a half hour from the Institute to Mrs. Stanton's. Of course, she'd have to change first. She looked down at herself. She was smudged with grime, and her hair was oily and limp from having been stuffed under a bowler hat for a day and a half. She looked like she'd just stepped out of California. All right, so she'd be a little late to Mrs. Stanton's lunch. Fashionably late, she suggested to herself hopefully. The rumble under her feet started small enough that it could be mistaken for one of the hundreds of small tumblers that Emily had already grown accustomed to. But it kept shaking, growing in thunderous intensity. This was a big one, Emily realized with sudden dread. The buildings around her seemed to sway. Terracotta crashed down around her. She hurried to the middle of the street to avoid the falling debris, stumbling as the earth bucked like a wild horse. Then there it was, the sound from her Cassandra, the horrible tearing, the cracking. The earth was opening up before her, a deep, wide, fissured gap, cobblestones churning like peas in a stew. The ground fell from beneath her feet, and Emily jumped, landing hard on a ragged, jutting outcropping. She scrambled to keep from sliding down into the stinking darkness as black exunge flowed up from deep within the earth, covering everything. Emily screeched and drew her legs to keep from coming in contact with the foul goo. If any part of her flesh touched the black exunge, she would be transmogrified into an aberrancy, just like the vermin that were blossoming up around her from deep underground. Beetles and centipedes were inflating and expanding with hissing shrieks. As the exunge deformed them, they expanded to hundreds of times their normal size, otherworldly jaws clattering menacingly. Of particular and immediate concern were the cockroaches. They clambered up over the lip of the torn sidewalk, mucus-dripping antennae waving like hairy carriage whips. Dear Mrs. Stanton, Emily thought, as she looked around herself in a panic for something she could use in her defense, Miss Edwards deeply regrets missing the lunch you arranged in her honor, but her absence was unavoidable as she was being eaten by giant cockroaches. She seized a cobblestone and heaved it. She was grabbing another one, but thought better of it when she saw that the first cobblestone did little more than attract the attention of the giant cockroach she'd thrown it at. The thing was heading straight for her. Boom! A shotgun blast, close enough that she could smell the powder. A man was beside her, a blur of motion. He leveled a short-barreled shotgun at the huge, slimy cockroach bearing down on her and pulled the trigger of the second barrel. The creature exploded in a rain of chitinous black parts and slimy mustard-yellow guts. Thrusting the spent shotgun into Emily's good hand, he unslung a rifle from his back and aimed at another cockroach that was waving greedy, grasping mouth parts at them. He blasted a load of silver into what would have been the thing's face, if it had a face, rather than a clattering maw. It collapsed, whistling and keening, hairy black legs twitching. The man wrapped a hand around Emily's arm, dragged her down the side of the crumbling mound of earth and rock, and then pulled her back behind an overturned wagon. He crouched by her side, putting the wood from the wagon bed, or putting the wood of the wagon bed at his back. Taking the shotgun from her, he reached coolly into his pocket and pulled out 2 more shells. He chambered these and clapped the weapon shut, thrusting the gun into her hand. At that moment, Emily got a good look at his face. She realized suddenly that it was the brown man, the Russian, who'd given her the ticket to Lost Pine. Despite the fact that death was approaching them rapidly, she stared at him for a moment. "Do you just hang around San Francisco waiting for me?" Emily said. He tipped his hat to her. "I have been sent to protect you," he said. He dropped a handful of silver-packed shells into her lap. He nodded toward a rat that was sniffing curiously at the edge of a flood of black exunge. "Keep your eye on that one. He will go at any moment." And indeed, the rat did. The moment its pink, quivering nose touched the exunge, the little creature stiffened and began to grow. Steadying the shotgun against her prosthetic forearm, Emily unloaded the first barrel. The silver shot tore the beast's head into a cloud of black and blood. "You're one of the Russians that was up bothering my pap," Emily yelled at him. "Sini Mira." "We did not harm him," the brown man said. He lifted the rifle, his bullet somehow finding the eye of an ant the size of a greyhound as it scurried over the top of the wagon. Emily winced as sticky bits splattered her clothing and her face. "We only had a few questions." "He doesn't have any answers for you," Emily said, "and neither do I. As I said, Miss Edwards, I'm just here to protect you. If you will cover me, I have a way to get us out of this terrible predicament." Emily lifted her shotgun again. An earthworm was whipping and flailing up from the ground. She wasn't quite sure where she should put the shot. Finally, she just blasted the thing in 2. She wondered if, like a normal earthworm, the thing would continue to live in 2 sections, but it had stopped wiggling toward them at least. "What does the Sinimira want with me?" As she struggled to reload, she noticed that he had taken a pineapple-shaped device from his jacket pocket. He pulled a small glass vial from somewhere inside his shirt, pulling out the cork with his teeth. He poured the contents of the vial into the device and screwed the top shut as he spoke. "I apologize," he said finally, "but that is not for me to answer." Then, popping up from behind the wagon, he depressed a button on the top of the pineapple thing and threw it into the vast black pool of exunge that was gathering in the middle of the ruined street. There was a bright flash as the contraption exploded. A sparkling, glowing match spread over the black exunge. Little glistening bubbles formed, glittering edges rushing out from the center of the pool like a piece of paper burning from the middle. The exunge solidified like cooling magma, turning an ashy gray color. No more aberrancies blossomed from within it. Those that were still alive slowed, their movements becoming stiff and jerky. "Aberrant-resistant bacteria," he explained. "It neutralizes black exunge, then devours it. It is a sadly fumble-handed technology for the battle situation. The bacteria must be kept warm by the body until it is ready for use, and then mixed with a high-powered glucose solution at the last minute." He paused. "My name is Dmitri." Emily gaped at him, trying to think of what she should say to that, when something slammed against her head, staggering her backward. Everything went blurry. There was a high buzzing sound and the rapid sound of beating wings. She thudded to the ground, her foot catching between 2 loose stones, twisting her ankle. Pain sparkled up her leg. She was aware of dark, hairy parts pawing her face and chest. She brought up her shotgun to fend the thing off. A flying thing, buzzing and whirring with a long tubular mouth part. A mosquito, Emily realized hazily. A giant goddamn mosquito. She swung the shotgun blindly, trying to beat the thing back, but it was on her, probing and groping, heavy as a small child. Dmitri was trying to pull it off her, but the needle-like feeding mouth of the thing was feeling for the place of bare skin between her belt and shirt. And then the 2 plunged in, and Emily screamed.